Reality Fighter TV. In today's video tutorial, I want to share with you 3 primary ways to use the body in order to generate power so you can produce effective force in your martial arts training. Now these 3 ways of generating power work irregardless of your age, your size, your gender, or your experience, or the system or style of martial arts that you train in. So let's go ahead and get into it in here. And let's talk about the 3 primary ways in order for you to produce force, increase your power, and better yet, understanding of more about biomechanics and physics and the relationship to motion. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel, turn on your notifications button, like the video, comment on it. If you do find this information informative, don't forget to share it with your friends. There's a ton of free content that I have on here. If you look through my channel in my playlist, there's a ton of free information that can help you in your martial arts training, whether you study mixed martial arts or whether you study self-defense training in here. So let's go ahead and get to it. Okay, so if you're somebody who's looking to increase your power or to learn how to understand how to generate more power, your body, or get a feel more of how to use your body in here, this video probably is going to be for you. So 3 types of ways, or 3 forms, or 3 methods, I'm going to say, in order to use your body to generate power to produce force are as follows. The first one is locomotion. Okay, locomotion is the sprint and hit analogy. Okay, so that means that you're in a functional fighting platform, like a sprinting position in here like this. And what I'm doing in here is I'm actually moving my body from point A to point B here in a very explosive manner in here. Okay, so that's a very common way to generate power. Obviously you're doing that in running, you're doing that in football, you're doing that in basketball in here, right? Track and field, obviously you're using a lot of locomotion here. But in martial arts, it's used very commonly in here, particularly when I have to cover distance in here. Okay, now in order for you to be effective with locomotion, you have to be in a functional fighting platform. Okay, so I have to have a stance or a platform that I'm operating on that takes advantage of all the proper biomechanics in here in the lower muscular here and up to the upper body here. Because it's not just about moving in here very quickly, but you have to be able to move, right? You have to be able to accelerate, right? You have to be able to decelerate and stabilize. All 3 of those things are happening, right, in a split second here. And coming after that, you have to be able to time a technique, right? So I have to be able to just go from point A, right, to point B, right, and time a punch. I have to be able to put the brakes on in here to make sure I don't, overcommit, right, in martial arts, because I can get countered or something in here, right? So the first one is locomotion, right? So we'll talk about that here as we go through the video in here, and I'm going to kind of demonstrate some of the ways that you can, some of the tactics that I use in order to improve or practice these 3 body directional forces here. Whether it's shadow boxing is a good way to do it, or on a punching bag or something. Okay, let's go to the second one. The second one is defined as, the body directional force is defined as rotation. Okay, now rotation is probably the most common form of body directional forces used in martial arts, right? So that's going to be, any rotation is torquing the body here, right, away from its center of rotation in here, the access point in here, torquing it through, right, or torquing it through this way. So, your uppercuts, right, your hooks in here, right, your spinning back fists in here, your round kicks, those are all rotational techniques, all right? Now, why I say it's the most common form of body power, right, probably more common than locomotion, is because most people, when they practice the martial arts techniques, they're practicing the techniques right at close range here, right at touching distance, right? So I'm standing in front of the bag in here, right, and I'm actually putting my body right at the end of the punch. Let's say if I'm putting my rear cross, my left rear cross, standing in that southpaw position, and I want to hit the bag right here like this, right? So a lot of times people practice techniques just by rotating their body, right, into the target here and trying to produce a lot of power. Right? Or if I'm delivering a round kick, right? They're already at range to stick their leg out here like this. So what they have to do is just kind of take their stance, put it in a functional position, right? Kind of economize the motion, right? And take their body through that action in here like that, right? So rotational force is going to be used probably best when you're already stabilized and you're already in range to hit the target, or reach out and touch the target, regardless if it's a punch, an elbow, right, or kick. If I'm throwing an elbow at the bag, right, the bag is right here. All I have to do is just reach out and touch, something like that, right? So the second type of force, body directional force, is rotation. The third and final type of body directional force you can use is called inclination. Now, inclination is going to be, by itself in isolation, I have found through practice and studying, it's going to be the weakest of all three forms if you're trying to use it in isolation. However, if you use it in conjunction with one of the other two types, locomotion and rotation, you can actually multiply your force, multiply your power, irregardless of your distance. All right? So let's define what inclination is. Inclination is basically rocking or arcing the upper body in here, right? It's the baseball pitcher throw in here like this, where at the last part of the technique in here like this, right, their body's leaned into the target like this, right? So when you watch a baseball thrower here, when he steps into here like this and throws the ball in the air, his body's arced in the direction, right, in the direction of the vector in here like this, right? But he's not just taking inclination, right? He's also, there's rotational forces going on, right? So inclination is arcing the torso into the target in here like this, right? Along a horizontal plane, right? So I could stand here like this in here, and I could just rock my upper body, boom, into a punch like this, right? Or I can rock my hips backward in here, diagonal, and deliver a kick in here, and that can help me produce some power, from a stable position, right? So locomotion is the sprint and hit analogy. Rotation is the batter swing analogy, okay, baseball bat, and inclination would be like kind of the pitcher throw analogy, right? So now what I want to do is go ahead and kind of demonstrate and share how I kind of practice those things in isolation. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, so creating the fighting platform. This diagram in here just kind of gives me a reference point of kind of where my feet are, and wherever my feet are, my hips are going to be pointed in the same position for the most part, as well as the rest of my body in here. And I'm going to go ahead and do this from a southpaw position as quickly as possible in here, because that's the stance that I function from. And it doesn't matter if you're a southpaw or conventional, it works the same. Okay. So basically, first thing is first in here. You have to create a centerline concept. Okay. So a centerline concept, right, is this piece of tape running through here, this line. Right? And a centerline concept is defined as a tracking device or a positional point of reference that puts you in a position of strength and power, in relationship to your immediate adversary or to your target. Okay, so it's a dividing line that divides my body in half and also divides my opponent in half, or the target that I'm working on in here, right? So my left side of my body, right, my left limbs are on this side of center line, and my right limbs are on this side of center line. Okay, so center line allows me to kind of use as a reference point to allow me to kind of, where does my body need to be when I start an action? Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, when you put yourself into a fighting platform, right? In my opinion, I recommend, and this is what I adhere to, is you must find a position of neutrality. Now, what does that mean? A position of neutrality means that you need to be in a physical position of readiness that allows you to access both sides of your body in a split second, in one motion. Okay? It allows me to access my arms, my head, my legs in here, and allows me to change direction in any direction I need to go, assuming I have the room to move. Okay, I need to be able to access both right and left sides of my body, right, in this plane of motion, on this plane of motion, back here, downward, upward, whatever. Okay, so that's one of the first things that has to happen, is you have to be able to have access to both sides of your body relatively easily. Okay, the next thing that defines a neutral platform, a fighting stance, is you want to be able to, when you have to take action, you want to be able to move in the most economical fashion you can. In other words, that means that I want to try to strip away all unnecessary actions that really don't have anything to do with performing the technique. Or maybe they do have performing the technique, but maybe they slow it down. Right? Maybe I don't need to take such a big step. right? Maybe I don't have to, maybe I need to load my body a little more. Maybe it's too upright in here and I have to bend my knees more and then take off when I could have just had my knees bent already. Okay, so anything that's going to slow down the action, right? Make it less smooth, more rigid in here, right? Anything that has to do with this wasted motion or motion that can be just kind of eliminated. And that's something that you're going to have to learn just through practice. So a neutral fighting platform is I want to strip away all unnecessary actions or wasted motion, economize my motion, right? And put my body in a position, in relationship to my target so I can access both sides of my body relatively easy. Okay? Now, from there, when creating a fighting platform, you got to remember that there's really no sport that you do that you're going to use one of these forms of body directional forces in isolation, right? So certain sports you may, right? Like football or something, if I'm a wide receiver or running back and I slam into somebody, right? That's 99% locomotion based, okay? Right? If I'm delivering I'm playing golf in here, right? That's all rotational based in here, right? There's no locomotion going on, right? In running, track and field, all locomotion, right? Basketball, locomotion, obviously, right? In martial arts in here, you're going to be, operating and using all 3 or 4 body directional forces in here. But really, most of the time, it's safe to say that most of the time, the body is going to use more than one of those directional forces in here. So that means that your fighting platform in here has to be in a position in here where you can kind of get your legs. Your legs are kind of already in position to use any one of those directional forces, right? If I have to locomote in here, I want to be able to sprint right, to the target. I don't want to have to adjust my feet too much and then go. Right? I want to kind of have them be active, right? If I all of a sudden have to, I'm standing here, fighting this guy in here like this, and I have to throw a lead right hook in here from the southpaw position, right? And my legs are too narrow, right? I may throw the hook real quick in here, but I hit the target, right? And my arm just bounces off, or I bounce off the guy, or nothing happens, right? Which is one of the reasons why somebody may just eat the punch, even though it looks super powerful on television, is because my feet were so narrow here, I couldn't generate any kind of abduction here with my legs in here. I couldn't push the earth in here, right, in order to generate that kind of rotational force and throw my weight through the target because my feet were too narrow, right, standing on centerline like this. So we want to make sure that when we are positioning our body here using centerline, one of the common things is not to do is to put your feet on centerline, is get off the tightrope. Okay, is to not put your feet on the tightrope and not have your toes pointed this direction when you're thinking about or dealing with energy going in this direction in here. Okay, so that's number one when it comes to creating a neutral fighting platform, is to make sure that you're facing your adversary with both weapons, have access to both weapons, right, both sides of your body, and making sure that you're mentally, that when you practice your techniques in here, that you want to strip away all unnecessary actions as you do that. Okay? Let's go on to the next part. Okay, so I just mentioned about creating a neutral fighting platform and some of the tactics that go into creating a neutral fight platform that I use in here. And I said you have to be able to strip away all unnecessary actions and try to create one-step actions whenever possible. I also mentioned here that you want to make sure that that you're not planed off and not standing on a tightrope in here where you can't access both sides of your body in here with minimal amount of movement. So if I'm standing sideways like this, right, and I'm thinking about having to move in this direction using locomotion in here, even though I can locomote delivering it, going this way in here, right, I can't effectively move very far repetitively like this, or run, and because remember locomotion is kind of the sprint analogy, right? And then then I have to turn my body and deliver a technique. So if I'm going to use locomotion in here, when I position my feet on centerline like this, I want to make sure that my feet are relatively facing forward in here, right? Now the next thing I want to bring up about using locomotion is one of the other mistakes that I think people do, at least I used to do it, is I'm going to stand this way here for camera purposes, is I used to stand too wide. I used to put my leg too wide in here like this, and I'd get my heel off the ground in here. So even my leg, right, you think about your rear leg, it's kind of what's called a drive and brace leg. It's like a sprinter leg in here, right? It's like a big, spring, a coil spring from a car compressed into the ground in here like this. And what I'm going to do is when it goes into extension here, it's just going to explode with all this force. but as I stood too wide in here, right, what would happen is that when I have to cover ground very far, right, I couldn't do it because my base of support, the area between my feet, was too wide. So I couldn't go any further than that, because technically your base of support, the area between your feet at any given moment, your real balance in that base of support is only 1/2 of your distance. So if I'm facing you like this in here on center line, and I got my back foot way back here, I may be facing you directly, and I can access, all my limbs in here like this, but I'm standing too wide, so I'm not going to be able to cover a whole lot of ground, right, for one, okay? So that's some of the limitations when you're using locomotion, is if you position yourself too stable, you're not going to be able to move very far continuously, right? So if you have to chain strikes together in here, right, chaining strikes, one after the next in here like this, right, particularly if you have to deliver a kick, you're going to have to really suck up your base in order to deliver the next technique, okay? And that's just, again, wasted motion. So people will stand, often is, number one is don't stand too wide when positioning yourself. Now what's too wide and what's too narrow? Well, some of this is going to be more intuitive feeling. So if I face it and give you this profile in here, right, if I go too wide and I can't move very well, then if I shorten this up, and I try it in here, I can move a little easier. I don't have to generate so much force. Back here I have to, right? And so what I do is I just keep shortening up the legs in here until I feel that I'm in a good sprint position where I can just move in here pretty quickly, right? And again, it's not about covering a whole lot of ground, right? I mean, you want to be able to do that, but realistically, locomotion needs to be used in control, right? I need to be able to accelerate, decelerate, and stabilize, right, and then deliver a technique. It's not like football, I slam into somebody and I don't care what happens afterwards. I have to be able to control myself. Okay, so when you're positioning yourself here for locomotion, is you want to make sure that your feet are not too sideways in here, not on the tightrope standing this way in here. Okay, and the other thing is you want to make sure they're not too narrow. If I bring them real narrow like this, even though my feet are facing straight, I have no stability this way. So when I have to, go forward in here real quick and then throw a hook, right, I just have to move my leg that much more, right, and I can get knocked off balance, right, dealing with an incoming force, right. So, a lot of martial arts don't take into account when they're talking about generating power. They just talk about generating power. They're not taking into account the disadvantages, and they're not taking into account, the equal opposite reaction when you're having to stabilize that force. In order for you to produce force, you have to be able to stabilize it, okay? So they're talking about just hitting a stationary target. Well, that's not happening in reality. Reality is that, a person's throwing a technique at you here, and you're thinking about moving this way, and then you got to move this way, and then you got to react and change direction in here. That's happening very fast. It takes a lot of control. So that's why it's important, and I'm sharing with you how to create a functional fighting platform that's not too wide, or this way in here. It's not too wide this way. It's not too planed off. It's not too passive, right? It's not too narrow, right? It's got to be in a position where there's minimal amount of movement that you can do, that you have to do, that gives you the ability to be stable and mobile altogether. Because in reality, you don't know exactly what you need. I don't know if I need to become stable right in the initial action. I don't know how mobile I need to be, right? So that's also what defines a neutral fighting platform, okay? So when you're applying this in here, right, is to make sure that your feet are not too wide, right, where you have to suck your base together in order to move. They're not too narrow, or if I just were to come up and push you, we used to do a lot of drills where you come up and push a person and they do this, well, that tells you you're not very stabilized. So I need to have, a monitored kind of high center of gravity in here, right, and activate the entire muscular structure of the legs in here like this. Make sure my feet are facing you in here, right, getting this back leg into a sprint position like this. So the heel should be up slightly off the ground. It should be flat-footed in here, right? It shouldn't be turned sideways initially in here like this for locomotion for purposes in here. Not too tall, not too flat. Somewhere where you feel like you can take advantage of your entire glute, hamstring, gastrocnemius, right? Achilles tendon here, right? All at once in here like that. Okay. So now that I've gotten through that on the neutral fighting platform, how it applies to locomotion, let's go on to the next body directional force. Okay, the next body directional force I want to talk about is rotational force. And some of the neutral principles that I use using this template and here, this diagram, to create a position where I can maximize my rotational power as well as be in a neutral position for any unexpected action that may occur when I'm sparring or something like that. All right. Now, rotational force is probably the most common force of directional force that we use in martial arts, right? Either all your roundhouse kicks in here, right? Your hooks, right? Throwing your rear cross, right? Your uppercuts, your back fists and stuff, right? All those create a torquing type of action, right? Even though they're happening on different planes of motion, like an uppercut, right? Has some rotational force coming up on a vertical plane like this, and like in the sagittal plane, right? Someone throws an overhand haymaker in here, right? That's happening on the transverse plane, right? Taking a multi-directional line of the target, right? Roundhouse kick in here, again, kind of the same thing. It's coming, it can come up on a diagonal, it can come over, right? It can come downward in here, right? It just depends on what you're trying to do with it. So rotational force can be used in a lot of different directions. And so that's why I say it's probably the most common. The other reason why I say it's the most common is because most martial arts skill sets that are practiced on bags and focus pads and in sparring and stuff and drilling are practiced right at close proximity. Okay, what that means is like the bag or the focus pad is right here, and I position my body where I can just rotate, right, into the target in here pretty easily without having to step first. So rotation usually occurs when the body doesn't have to actually advance to the target very much, and it's also happening when the body is already stabilized. So the body is not in motion before the action occurs usually, right? So very seldom are people bouncing around on their feet in here like this and decide to throw a really powerful round kick because their body has to move, plant, and deliver a technique, right? If you look at, again, a baseball bat swing, you don't see a batter out here moving around on the ground like this first and then go, okay, here it comes, and steps into it, right? He's positioned himself, he's stabilized. There's very little movement in here just to get his body to start creating the acceleration effect, right, from the beginning in order to bring that whole technique, through the range of motion. So when you're applying rotational force, when I would practice and teach it, and this is what these other diagonal lines are for, is so you have your center line, you're always starting on center line in here, right? And so you have to, in order to deliver, let's say a force delivering from right to left, right? In other words, so let's say I'm throwing a right hook in here, okay, coming through in this direction in here, right? Right? That body has to angle itself in this direction at the point of impact, right? So this half of the body mass is slamming into the target, okay? So I have to have my body mass behind the target, okay? Irregardless of how much I weigh. The other thing that's happening too is the arm, depending upon the arc of the arm, right? So a lot of people think of, okay, the power may be generated just through the arm, and certainly it can. So if I have coming, again, the baseball bat swing, the further the bat is coming from from the center of rotation, which means my spine, the further of the bat that's coming away, the bigger arc I have, the more velocity, the more time it has to pick up, momentum in here, right? And obviously it's going to have more power. Taking a rock, tying on the end of a shoelace, and the shoelace is this long as opposed to this long. A lot more force I can pick up in here just by swinging it faster and faster and faster. Okay, so I can generate power through the arm, but that's a part of it in here. So when I position myself, what I would recommend in here is if I position myself, let's say on this line, and we know my feet are on the opposite side of the center line, I'm still a little too narrow. Because when I go to torque the technique, as I push the floor out from underneath me and I push my ball of foot into the ground and and I abduct my leg in more like this, right? All my hip flexors are coming in, right? And then my oblique slings are slinging around like this. My spine's rotating in here. My arms arcing out. Even though my feet are here like this, right? If I make contact in here, I'm kind of narrow. There's nothing behind me that's going to stabilize against that counter force. Again, you have to take into account for every action, there's an equal opposite reaction. Right? So it may look okay, shadow boxing in here, right? But what's going to determine the difference between you knocking somebody out as opposed to just bouncing off their head, right? It's going to be your position right before and you actually make contact. Okay, so that's why it's important that, if anything out of this video, that this position of neutrality is super important. That's why I have to face forward like this. If I'm facing sideways in here and I throw a hook, even though my body's closer, the only advantage of doing this is my body's closer to the target. I can throw a quicker arm punch. Now there's some advantages to do this. But initially, for a beginner, just the understanding of body positioning in relationship to force and motion, right? I need to have the hip and shoulder pulled back so there's space to torque. So if I start here, and here's where I'm finishing the technique, there's very little space right here. More space in here like this. I have a bigger way to move this revolving door, boom, in here. So what I would used to do is I would stand here on this tape and I would try to throw the punch like this, right, on a bag or something in here, and I'd get knocked off balance. So then I realized, okay, I gotta step out wider. So what I do is I put the tape here and I would actually start from here. So I'm in a very narrow position, not a great position to fight from, right? Right? But just for training this rotation, I'd step out like this and then I torque the blow in. And I'd be like, okay, that's where I need to be, right on the point of impact. That's where my feet need to be. So how do I get my feet there from a neutral stance, assuming I might have to locomote, or I have to move this direction. I may have to pull my leg back in here. I may have to, jump in here like this. How do I position my feet? So I had to come up with a way to position my feet where I could get ready to do any one of those, right, in any moment in here like this. If I have to change direction, right, if I have to pull my leg back in here, if I have to pick my leg up and put it right back down and throw a hook, I want to be able to do that. Okay? If I have to, step in and throw, a linear technique this right in here like this, maybe I'm faking the guy in here, right? I don't want to step too wide and overcommit, right? Because now if I want to deliver a kick behind that, I can't do that, right? But if I shorten my base up a little bit, I go half a step, I can slide this leg up, boom, in here and do that very quickly in here. If I want to chain anything onto that, I have to take an advantage of this, where my feet are need to be. So can I step forward and then step over and throw a hook? Yeah. Well, what if I can cut some of that distance out of it? What if I don't have to go step, step? What if I just want to step forward and throw a hook? I still have my body mass behind it. I certainly can do that, and that's why I just step right here, boom, and like that. If I step too wide and step over here, whoops, I can maybe throw a hook. Okay, wham, but if I miss, I'm not in a position to continue any combination because my base is too wide. So often a lot of fighters in martial arts will stand too wide and they'll step even wider. And they wonder why they get countered, or they can't, or their follow-up punches nothing in here because they're so out of position. Okay, so when you're practicing rotational force, you need to get your body in such a position in here where it's on this side of the target a little bit, so you can throw your weight in it. Okay, and obviously if you're standing this way, you would step over here, right, and angle the body this way. So you see how I angle my body and I bring my weight through my head, and everything comes through the center line like this. Right? So from a southpaw position, feet are facing forward. And you can always feel when you step when you're too wide because you feel like you're coming up on your toes. I should be able to step, right? Drag this leg if I need to be. Lower my center of gravity, wham. Right? Small step. So I'm here, step, boom. Right? So you're not always going to be perfectly stabilized. Remember I said rotation, you're probably going to be stabilized before you deliver the technique. Probably, but sometimes I could be in motion here, moving around, and boom, and I got to do that, and then come back, right? Moving around here, step, bam, right? And you got to feel where that step is, not see it. Okay, so that hopefully that helps understanding how to position your body for a rotational type of force when it comes to creating a neutral fighting platform. So let's go ahead, let's go on to the third and final body directional force. Okay, the third and final body directional force that you can use to help generate power is defined as inclination. Right, and inclination, again, I said, is the pitcher throw in here. Okay, now taking the same diagram in here approach using inclination. Inclination usually occurs along a horizontal line like this, horizontal plane like this, right? And most of the time when you do use it, you're going to use it in conjunction with probably locomotion most of the time, right? So for example, I could step forward in here, locomote, and then kind of sling my body forward like this, right? Even though there's some rotation going on. But again, if you think about the end of the last part of the actual action of my body is not the step, right? And it's the inclination. So if you have, you can take your torso. A lot of people, when they talk about delivering rotational power, like throwing a cross punch in here, a lot of them will see, I see that their spine is upright like this, right? Their pelvis is in a posterior tilt in here, right? And that is, from a biomechanics standpoint, that is incorrect because you're not in a position to stabilize force, all right? Again, you got to take into account, you got to stabilize the energy that's coming right back at you, not something in front of you where you can go and hit it and just kind of control the energy because you know it's not going to, move at you. So when you do inclination, most of the time your feet aren't going to be moving. If you're doing it, if I'm demonstrating it isometrically, right, in here, it's the rocking of the upper body. So if I stand on this line in here, right, I can generate power just by rocking, right, forward in here like this. And depending upon how hard I contract my rectus abdominis in here, so I'm going in the spine flexion in here, right, I can generate, a certain amount of force. Right, so if you can snap your body forward in here, right, you can deliver a certain amount of energy. Right, so where does this apply? Right, this applies maybe just in grappling. I'm standing right, clinching with the person in here like this, right, and maybe I grab my headbutt them. Right, that's all inclination in here. Right, or maybe I throw just a short punch, right, in here a little bit, boom, right, just with my arm, and maybe I lean into it a little bit. Right. Right, so again, you can see, no matter what I do, there's going to be some degree of rotation going on in here. But when I'm trying to demonstrate it isometrically, what I'm trying to actually do is I'm just trying to rock the upper body into a target. So if I throw it, let's say a jab, I can just reach out and rock in like that, right? So along the center line in here, if I step a little bit, I do. If I don't, I'm just bending at the waist. Bending at the torso in here, whop, and like that, right? So it's a pretty simple one to do. Most of the time, probably not the most natural thing to do, right? Natural movement to do when it comes to delivering force. I mean, what sport do you play that you just do that, right? Not a whole lot, right? But like I said earlier, you can use it in conjunction with other things, right? So if I'm delivering a kick, right, I can rock backwards and kick a person, wham, the groin going backwards. Now if I just try to use my leg, that may not be enough to do it, right? But if I can get some momentum coming from my hips or from my center of mass, boom, right, I might be able to do that, right? And if I go to kick a football, right, in here, right, and I step forward in here, right, whoa, right, there's inclination going on. It's certainly not rotation very much, right? Even though my hips are rotating up this direction, it's mainly the snapping and the upward of my hips in here and my torso leaning back. So torso leaning forward, rocking forward, right? Bending here or rocking my hips backward. Okay? Now, so when you're practicing inclination, most of the time you're going to use it against linear type of techniques, right? Jabs, crosses, right? In here, front kicks, you might be able to do it with a hook. I don't normally do that at all, but it's primarily more linear type of techniques, right? So again, it's got to come from a neutral fighting platform in here, right? If you're standing too wide, you may not be able to rock very far, right? I certainly can't kick if I'm standing too wide like this, again. So you have to create a neutral base of support in order for that to happen, right? So when you're positioning yourself, when you're practicing, right, the idea is when you're going to use one of those three forms of body power, what technique can you do that with, right? So when you're trying to cover a lot of ground and you're practicing on the bag, right? So let's say I'm punching a punching bag in here and I'm practicing locomotion. Make sure that you stand just far enough out of range where you can step in relatively comfortably and hit the target. One of the mistakes that a lot of people make is when they hit a bag, right, is they just stand in front of the bag and rotate into the target like this. They don't know how to cover any distance, right? Or standing real sideways like this, you know, and just throwing punches at the bag in here, and they never learn how to practice locomotion, which is why a lot of MMA fighters particularly have a hard time covering ground. They're always running at the guy and telegraphing because they don't know, they don't practice that at all. Everything is practiced at point blank range, right? So, you know, when you're practicing, you gotta get in the right range for it. So practicing locomotion, I want to be just far enough, just a little bit where I can step in and make contact with the target. Right? It's not about taking a big leaping step. It's just about gliding across the floor and moving my whole body as a unit. If I'm practicing rotational type of force, another common mistake from this profile is you'll see fighters, they're too far away when they should be using locomotion, right? They're doing stuff like this. They're using inclination, rotating, they're trying to lean in like that. Now, I see more still photos of UFC bouts where a guy's like this and he's getting clocked, countered hard because he's so far out of position, right? I'm going, he's too far out of position to do anything. He should be trying to move in closer, right? He should be trying to walk the guy down a little bit. But instead, he's so far away, throwing a technique from back here. So using the wrong body directional force. If you're working clinch fighting or grappling, obviously you're locked up, he's got a hold of you in here, there's no locomotion going on. It's all rotation pretty much, right? An elbow, right? An uppercut, right? And then you're kind of delivering a knee, kind of rocking backward, boom, you know, inclination in there, right? So most of the time, when I practice these things, well, I don't really need to practice them anymore because I've got them down pretty good, is I always practice them from a shadow boxing perspective. So I didn't look in the mirror or anything. I wasn't concerned about my speed and stuff. What I wanted to do was I wanted to practice, could I move, could I step, could I rotate, right? Could I lean back, right? Snap back, right? Bam, incline, right? Could I step over here, punch, right? Punch, rotate, right? Step back, move my head over here, like this, boom. So I was always making sure that my hips and my shoulders and my head were underneath itself. And I always paid attention to my base of support. I'm not too wide, I'm not too narrow, I'm not too tall. Okay, I'm not crossing my legs on the center line. My legs aren't locked out. My foot's not turned too sideways like this. I wanted to make sure that I could reach my target. You know, when I started actually hitting things, boom, and I hit something in here, right? So I hope that created some value for the audience who's interested in learning how to generate, you know, different types of body power in here. And in the future here, I may do a more detailed video on breaking these things down, each one of these body directional forces down and applying them in a certain technique. But I figured, you know, on YouTube today, I share this thing because I don't see a whole lot of this out there. I see how to deliver a hook, how to deliver a rear cross, right, using that rotation. But I don't really see a lot of the repercussions if you do it like this as opposed to like this. So I hope you found this video informative. If you do, again, please give it a thumbs up, comment on it, make sure you turn on your notifications, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, right? And in the description below, you'll find links to my website. You'll find links not only to my website, but to also some of my detailed instructional videos that I have for sale. That you can purchase that are very, very innovative, that have to do with certain tactics and techniques that I've developed over the years that would help your MMA training. So make sure you go in the description and then look for those links, right? Check out richaldenperformance.com. And thank you, and we'll see you next time on Reality Fighter TV. Take care.